Hey guys, Jeremy here and welcome to the big review of the big FAQ. And it was a big FAQ, wasn't it? I'm sure we were expecting quite a large, and comprehensive change, but it did hit a lot of different things. So it has taken me a couple of days to digest all the different elements of the FAQ. And I'm going to give my opinions now on it. I'm going to cover quite a few different points, so bear with me. But as normal, I'm going to try to keep this video, rein it in and keep it around the half an hour or so mark. And for those that are watching that are interested in my opinion on Grey Knights, I will be releasing a more specific Grey Knights kind of focus video after this. So to start with, I really wanted to kind of start, because I was a little bit critical in a previous video where I kind of was discussing the timing of GW's FAQ. While they were very late with their march into kind of the seasonal FAQ, they were very good in owning that lateness. And if you do look at the press release of their FAQ, you'll notice they kind of blotched out March and changed it to April, thus like taking ownership for it and suggesting that they're not going to throw off their whole calendar. They're not going to change it to this very kind of like wide-spanning seasonal style of paradigm. They're just admitting that they were a little bit late and they were taking into account the results, of course, from like previous large tournaments. So I think that was quite admirable, and I think they did a great job of that. Now I'm going to move into one of the more significant parts of the FAQ, which of course were the points adjustments. We saw things like Reapers go up, which was very expected. I think they hit the bullet on the head right with the 34 point mark. Eldar Psykers went up across the board, which I haven't really heard people talk about that. That's actually quite a large nerf to the top of the meta Eldar lists, which can generally featured between the Warlocks, Spirit Seers, and Farseers about 100 points worth of increases. So you'll find that actually will have an effect on the Eldar Psychic phase and Eldar list construction. Fire Raptors went up, which wasn't surprising. Flying Hive, Tyrants, and Biovores, also pretty reasonable price hikes. And then there were, of course, other things such as Gilliman and other very minor points increases, and some very reductions like with the commissars and stuff. But as with something like this, and as has been discussed with people that have talked about the points increase and points reduction situation, it's very hard to be totally comprehensive and hit everything. It's and something like Shining Spears, where for me, even before the FAQ, I thought Shining Spears, based on my CanCon winning experience, were the best Eldar unit. I thought Shining Spears were better than Dark Reapers. Of course, Dark Reapers were being spammed more in the metagame. It feels really bad to get shot twice by a unit of 10 Dark Reapers, but as far as a unit by unit kind of analysis goes, I think Shining Spears are superior, and they didn't really get hit, of course, outside of the maximum of 3 data sheets change. So to me, that already signals like a bit of an oversight from GW. And I've also put Baneblades there as well, because they didn't get hit, and Baneblades have been a very strong kind of unit in the metagame, and they're actually also going to get stronger because of the fact that Deep Strike, Assault from Deep Strike's getting nerfed. So things like Shining Spears are very prominent meta-defining example for me, because I think they're going to absolutely be the kings of the metagame for the next 3 to 6 months until the next FAQ comes out. And something like Baneblades is a secondary consideration. It's very difficult when you're doing these points adjustments to have perfect information and do everything perfectly, like a supercomputer might in kind of a futuristic dystopian world. But ultimately, I am heralding those 2 units as something to keep an eye on. Things that probably should have gone up that didn't. As a result, people are going to now invest in those and lists rather than spamming 30 Dark Reapers and whatever else people had, lots of Fire Raptors. Now they're going to be Baneblades and Shining Spears. The anti-soup and anti-spam rules, they're interesting. The soup rules I don't think are comprehensive enough personally. A lot of people predicted that style of change to soup, like no small, the large kind of sub-faction keywords not working. I don't think it's enough. I think that, for example, my Eldar list was already running 1 Alektok battalion and 1 Ynnari battalion. I wasn't really combining them. I don't think even like some of the other soup style armies care that much. It is a bit of a nerf to Celestine, because often Celestine was taken in a soup detachment. So I think the biggest unfortunately the biggest loser there is Saint Celestine and Imperialists that were including her. But I think they'll find a way, right? They'll find a way to maybe just a small brigade with one unit as, of sisters or whatever to get Celestine in. The spam rules, I think, are pretty good. I think that mass kind of maximum of one data sheet 3 times means that it's just a good kind of overlay type of rule that is just a stopgap rule to stop anything from happening in the future. It's kind of just like it lowers the potential harm of kind of a unit being considered overpowered. So in the example I used earlier of Shining Spears, yeah, Shining Spears are amazing, but you can only have 27 of them in a list now. You can't have a whole list of Shining Spears. So the fact that you can only have 27 means that GW could kind of like, it reins in the kind of absurdity that we'll see when people do identify lists that are that are using undercosted or very strong units. So I actually like that change. Even though technically it does hurt some units more than others, it is something that I support, that kind of inbuilt insurance into the rule set that prevents abuse from occurring when obviously the rules team can't fix every possible thing in advance. So I like that. And as I said, the soup situation, I think it could have been a little bit more heavy-handed, but let's not worry about that for now. The next one is the extra CP for battalions and brigades. Now, I think the battalion change was okay because we often found that elite armies like Custodes, like Grey Knights, whatever else you want to pick out, thin air, like maybe Imperial Knights, armies like that really struggled to generate command points. Now that with that battalion change, we will see things like Grey Knights and Custodes that can maybe squeeze 2 battalions into their list, be able to run with something like 2 times 5 plus 3, so about 13 command points is pretty reasonable. It's a solid buff for them. It lets them use their stratagems almost for an extra turn. So I'm a supporter of that. Although the brigade situation I think is a little bit over the top. 12 command points for a brigade. People were already running very min-maxed kind of, or no maxes there, Imperial Guard brigades just for the 9 command points. And the ability to use the Warlord trait to get more command points, and the Relic as well. Now they're getting an extra 3 out of thin air. I don't think that was necessary. I realized that the GW wanted to scale the brigade bonus, given that the battalion bonus was going up, but I don't think that 12 was necessary. I think like it's a little bit much. Maybe they had to do it. I don't know. It just feels like that Imperial Guard minimum brigade is going to be ridiculously strong now, especially because Imperial Guard are kind of getting a buff as well based on the anti-deep strike rules. So I expect to see that package, the Imperial Guard package, occurring in almost any Imperial list that wants. Not only are they getting command points, they're getting cheap screens, they're getting some firepower backfield as well. It's just ridiculously strong and efficient, and I think that is going to be like the new conscripts. Like in, obviously when 8th dropped, conscripts were like the must-have battalion in any Imperial army, had a battalion with conscripts. Now it's going to be that brigade of Imperial Guard for CP generation and just screening. So it's just a very, very efficient unit package there. So I think the brigade could have just given +10 instead of +12, but I wanted to herald this inflation as what I think is the kind of what in 7th edition we call the bloat. I think this is going to represent the bloat in 8th edition. By giving every army, even armies that didn't need extra CP, more CP, you're going to make that kind of the decision-making process with stratagems less important. And people are going to be starting the game with as many as 20 or 25 command points, which means, and that's not even including the ability to generate, more. It's just going to mean that a lot of command point decisions are going to be automatic. So you're not even going to have to think, oh, will I use the, Auspex scam stratagem? Or will I use my, extra +1 to wound stratagem? You just automatically, people are going to be using every stratagem they can, which means that we're going to see kind of a bloat in terms of the amount of time that takes. It's going to take time into the game. And it's also going to make armies with strong stratagems stronger. So I don't really think that was the most elegant solution to that problem. I think, for example, armies like Grey Knights and Custodes that were heralded as elite or considered elite armies, they could have been a little bit more specific about how they gave those armies extra command points. Like you might say, Drago give him a rule similar to a Baton, where Drago generates extra command points for Grey Knights, so they have the ability to do that if they want more command points. I don't know, I just think that this is a bit of a bloat situation. The next point is the anti-deep strike rules, and this was probably the most significant change of the FAQ, and of course it's kind of a twofold change, where we saw the original rule is you can't deep strike in your opponent's half of the board on turn one, and the second part of the change is that you have to have half your army in power level deployed on the board, not just in unit count. So those twofold changes obviously represent quite a large nerf to Alpha Strike or Beta Strike, Deep Strike style armies. And that change does feel a little bit clunky. And people, I've spoken to people about this, and there's a little bit of like, people are just unsettled by it. They feel like it was a very heavy-handed, kind of ham-fisted change, where Games Workshop just like brought down this hammer, and they've hit what they wanted to hit, but everything in the radius of 5 kilometers has been exploded as well. So we're seeing things like, obviously they wanted to hurt stuff like, you know, the Kudos drop, or, you know, Blood Angels all super deep strike drop, or, you know, great Eldar doing lots of deep strikes, or whatever they were trying to hit. Things like Bloodletter bombs and things. They're obviously hurting that, and they're being hit. But then you've got the poor suckers like this Grey Knights that are still collecting dust on the shelf for many people, also getting nerfed, which seems a little bit clunky. You know, and I wanted to kind of discuss a little bit about that and how it could have been done better. But at the end of the day, I think that sometimes I respect that Games Workshop are confronting an issue that they know is going to plague their game for days, months, weeks, years if they don't confront it. And when they transitioned from 7th edition to 8th edition and got rid of the scatter dice, I knew straight away when we heard the news that the Deep Strike was just kind of guaranteed and accurate, that the strength of that mechanic was increasing. Because obviously, you know, as you guys might know, when you play games, when something's reliable, it becomes stronger. When you don't have to account for variance and account for worst case scenarios, things become a lot stronger because you can invest in that game plan from the beginning. And they kind of, obviously, we've seen so many armies adopt deep striking now and use it as a very powerful, integral part of their strategy. So Games Workshop said, okay, let's pull it back and let's at least give people that first turn to move and insulate their board. And effectively what that does is, all it does, if you want to think about it from a more holistic perspective, is it just means that every army counts as having invisible nurglings or scouts set up kind of at forward presence beyond their deployment zone. If you were playing a Deep Strike army and you were versing, going to a tournament with, say, Black Demons or Charybdis Drop or Blood Angels, you had to kind of expect that once you hit those top tables on day 2 of the event or day 3 of the event, you're going to be running into people with nurglings and scouts. You're not going to be able to deep strike in your opponent's half of the board most of the time at the end of the game, like at the end of the tournament, because people are going to have these scouts and nurglings set up. Even if you win the roll-off and deploy your scouts first, they're just going to kind of insulate the other side of the board and deploy most of their army where they've insulated. So, you know, that's why obviously there's this metagame where people are working out how to lock scouts in combat, how to manipulate scouts, and there's this new metagame based purely around nurgling and scout interaction and you know, blocking them in combat. So all this is kind of doing is saying, you know what, guys, everybody counts as having scouts, everybody counts as having nurglings, so no one's turn 1 is going to be super efficient, right? In many ways, it still has made nurglings and scouts very strong. They haven't lost power as such, because the game is now going to transition into a rush for board presence on turn 1. So on turn 1, people are going to be pushing. It's like almost like you've got 2 forces and they're trying to push each other to see who gets the board space. Whoever gets more board space is going to be able to capitalize on deep strikes on turn 2. So the metagame is now going to push into favoring units that can move forward aggressively and take that part of the board to deny your opponent's deep strikes on turn 2, and also to facilitate your own deep strikes on turn 2 as well, so you don't get locked out. So we're gonna see armies like Imperial Guard that are going to be very strong because they can just push chaff units forward. Shining Spears are absolutely amazing because they move really fast, they do a lot, and they don't really lose anything from their ability to be quickened. So Shining Spears are still really good even despite this change. So the rules feel a little bit clunky, but I don't mind them because what they do is they... Eventually, if this rule didn't come in, Scouts and Nurglings would have to be nerfed. Because Scouts and Nurglings were too strong compared to every other style of deployment in the game. So we're certainly going to see a rise in that type of army that wants to push forward. But we're also going to see a rise in the second best style of deployment, which is your kind of Alpha Legion, Raven Guard style infiltrate after roll to seize. So if you get first turn, you can move forward anyway. So I think initially the meta is going to see like a large shift towards that style of deployment. We're going to see a lot of Alpha Legion armies. We're going to see a lot of Raven Guard armies. But then I think people are going to realize that they're going to put those Scouts back in the list. So you're going to have Nurglings and Scouts come back, and we're going to be kind of back to square one. But what it does mean, though, is that there is that level of kind of base support for armies that just don't have access to infiltrators, like your infiltrate denial, like for example, your Scouts and Nurglings, which means an army like Tau are going to get a lot stronger now because Tau couldn't really block people out. They could only do their scout move with their crew. Now they get that first turn immunity so they can push forward their crew guaranteed and create that wall. So I think we're going to see Tau benefit a lot from this. So that's a very important thing. I'm going to discuss the winners and losers in a second, so I won't go too much into that. But now I want to talk about, I've quickly put there in my notes, there's a little bit of conjecture about whether this rule is going to affect first turn, things that were deployed on the board, but that can gate in or move in or teleport in on turn one. So example being like the jump, as you can see here, gated infinity. People are saying they think these abilities will work, but this answer to an FAQ question, I think, is to me, what it makes me feel like those rules don't work. So unfortunately, this not only hits Deep Strikers, but it hits Grey Knights that want to gate, it hits Orcs that want to use the jump, and it hits Blood Angels that want to use on Wings of Fire. So I'll just read it out for people that can't read that. It says that if a unit uses a rule that removes them from the battlefield and then sets them up again, such as the Teleport Homer ability or the Gated Infinity Psychic Power, does that unit count as having moved for the purposes of moving and firing heavy weapons? And the answer is yes. Treat such units as if they are arriving on the battlefield as reinforcements. So the answer to that question, even though it's not specific to the new Deep Strike rule, does imply that that very likely we'll see GW not allow those units to move into the opponent's half of the board on turn one. So, of course, there's a bit of conjecture there. People are taking each side of the argument. So I think we just need to wait and see. But what I think this rule now needs is we now see a situation where GW are including these rules to try to stop people from coming in, deep striking, assaulting, and absolutely dominating their opponent in assault on turn one. So, you know, the nerf to moving after deep strike, such as like you can't use, you know, your kind of what's it called, like you can't use like Wings of Sanguinius, for example, or the Chaos Power, that warp time. You can't use warp time after you deep strike. So it's kind of, we can see that they don't want people to come in and assault guaranteed. Huge nerf to Charybdis drop. But I think we need a new rule. So this is my time to say, I think that this rule needs to come in, a reckless deep strike style rule, to not penalize units that just want to come down and shoot. I think you need to be able to come down and shoot, you know, from turn one and not and be able to land within 9 of an enemy. So I think there needs to be a new rule called Reckless Deep Strike, where you can deep strike at any point in the board. You can even deep strike within 9 of an enemy unit, but you can't assault that turn, and you're like -1 to hit with shooting. I think there needs to be a rule where you can come into pockets. I think right now the problem with the game is that there's this situation where the units, you can position 2 units 18 inches away from each other. So we're looking at this distance, 18 inches away, and no one can deep strike in that gap, because if a model's here, it's within 9 inches of there and within 9 inches of there. So that 9-inch denial rule means that if you just plop units 18 inches away from each other across the board, you just deny the whole board from deep strike. And I think it's getting to a stage where it's getting a bit ridiculous, especially with this new rule that's stopping you from capitalizing on turn one. So now your opponent can just push forward, create this massive matrix of 18-inch gaps. It's just a bit silly. And it doesn't really make sense either. Why, if you've got an 18-inch gap, why can't a model come in there? Like, it just doesn't make sense. So I think there needs to be a new rule called Reckless Deep Strike, where you can deep strike within 9 of an enemy, and it can be done on turn 1, but you can't assault after that, and you're -1 to hit with your own shooting weapons. So you're not as effective when you come down. It represents an army, a unit, taking a risk, being very aggressive, but then paying a small price in terms of their flexibility after their deep strike. That rule, something like that, needs to come in because the game is getting a bit clunky now. Now let's move to my last kind of point. How's the meta going to shift? I've kind of alluded to it various times, but what are the overall winners and losers, and how will the meta shake up? So I think, as I've kind of suggested, Tau are going to get a big buff because they didn't have nurglings or scouts. So they were at kind of the mercy of armies that could push them forward and just come in and you know, absolutely annihilate them from the start of the game. Now they get that turn to push their crude out, create a bit of a wall, and start shooting and start delivering heavy damage, especially because opponents can't deny on power level anymore. Now that they can't just put all these non-significant units on the board, now they have to have half their power level on the board. It means that Tau can smash those units with shooting. So we're going to see a meta shift towards shooty armies are going to be rewarded because they can penalize their opponent on their turn 1. They can say, okay, you've deployed half your power level on the board, even though you've manipulated a little bit, you've looked at units that can minimize their points per power level. People are still going to do that, and I'm going to do a bit of a tactic on that in the next video. But people like Tower and Gilliman Gunlines are going to be able to say, okay, you've got half your power level on the board, you're dead now, right? So we're going to see these shooting armies like Imperial Guard, like Gilliman Gunlines, like Tau get big benefits. GSC somehow came through the whole Alpha Strike nerf unscathed. And cat's out of the bag. I legitimately think GSC are one of the best armies at the moment, and they didn't get hit. And I think that we're going to see a meta emerge where GSC Tyranid players are just going to say, oh, okay, you thought you nerfed us. You thought you hit Hive Tyrants. That's fine. Suck on 40 Gene Stealers. You know, it's going to be legitimate. It's going to hurt. And people are going to be shaking their head wondering why GSC were immune. Especially when you look at how powerful their stratagem is with the Primus that lets them roll 3 dice and re-roll it as well. So they're getting effectively up to 6 rolls to look for a 5 or a 6. So GSC, big winners. And also, as just a bit of a caveat, as I mentioned, any army that didn't have access to nurglings or scouts are going to benefit because they get that insulation for free now. So Imperium armies and Chaos armies were already coming with this free insulation, with the caveat of a dice roll just for very minute differences. Now those other armies are getting those benefits. So Necrons are getting those benefits, you know, etc., etc., etc. A lot of other more kind of off meta armies are going to be being able to see more play. And what about the losers? The losers are obviously any armies that were predicated on assault from deep strike. So the most obvious one would be like demons, and things like the Charybdis drop, which like to drop lots of berserkers out of Charybdis and then warp time them into assault. That army's basically dead in the water now. It can't even function. Blood Angels that love to come down with a very heavy ratio of their army, like lots of Sanguinary Guard and Death Company and things. They're pretty much dead now as well. Although those armies might just, and Grey Knights are in a similar boat, those armies will just kind of have to insulate a turn and have more of a turn 2 shot at things. So Mass Deep Strike, of course, got hurt as well. And I think the biggest, as I said, biggest example of that is Grey Knights, because now they have to have half their power level on the board, which means that not only can they not be as aggressive on turn 1, even if you want to say, okay, you know, most armies are going to screen out Grey Knights anyway, so Grey Knights aren't going to really be getting turn 1 charges, that's fine. Like, I'm happy to accept that. But the problem is now Grey Knights are going to have all these expensive models on the board, and strong shooting opponents are just going to kill the easy to kill Grey Knights on the board. So we're going to have to see meta shifts where you're going to have like rhinos filled with interceptors, or, you know, for Blood Angels you'll have you know, like just lots of very efficient shooting style units that have a high power level deployed on the board. I haven't done too much research and investigation into what those things are, but I think we'll see a lot of rhinos with guys inside so that you've got insulation from that turn 1 alpha from your opponent. Anyway, guys, that rounds out my FAQ review. The final thoughts are that I do think there are some positives. I think I'm glad that GW took ownership for their lateness, and I'm glad that GW are trying to curb the most top of the meta lists. Like, for example, they did hit the Dark Reapers being able to fire and fade into a Wave Serpent. That they've stopped them from doing that now. I think that was like a really good little elegant change, because that was something that was making Reapers super strong. The change to the Soul Burst power, Word of the Phoenix, that's a pretty good change. Like, because it makes it just less reliable now. So you're not going to have those Ynnari players every turn, like only a 5-up with your Vrain to cast it. Now it's a 7-up with your Vrain. So it's a lot more mathematically difficult. Overall, some great changes. We are going to see a meta shift. Keep your eyes out for Shining Spears. Baneblades are still strong. Imperial Guard Brigades and GSC. So they're my top 4 lists. And you will see, of course, just a resurgence of Eldar, because Eldar with those Shining Spears are going to be very, very strong. So thanks, guys, and we'll see you for my next video, which is going to be a very deep analysis of Grey Knights, because that's obviously the army I've kind of committed to run this year, and how I'm going to try to make them work despite this kind of apocalypse of Deep Strike for them. So see you in my next video, guys, and cheers.